grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all.
And also with you.
The story that Kristen read from the book of Acts is really the story of the beginning of the church, and it is both a challenging story and a disturbing story. It's challenging because it's a story that tries to push us onwards from where we are in the church. It's a disturbing story because it has elements in it that are not what we would experience in our everyday, ordinary lives. After all, rushing winds in a room like this, which can hold a couple of hundred people, tongues of flame, these are not in our experience, and that they're more like burning creosote bushes in the desert that talk. It just isn't something we experience. And so that becomes disturbing. And then as the story progresses and the Spirit pushes the followers of Jesus out, it is disturbing in that they have to walk into a newness, into a place of being the church that they have never experienced before. Really, when you get down to it, this story from the book of Acts is an origin story. And origin stories have a number of different functions. They can tell us sort of why things are the way they are. They often convey values of a community. Sometimes they tell us how to behave and how to relate with each other. Often they tell us what our trajectory is based out of our identity and purpose as a group. And when you really begin to look at this story, those elements do come out very, very strongly. So let's begin just by recalling the story. It begins at dawn on the day of Pentecost. This, in Jewish tradition of the time, was an ancient agricultural festival that had been taken over and given religious meaning as the day celebrated when Moses went up on the mountain to receive the tablets of Torah from God. And so it's an important day in the life of Judaism in the first century. And we find the followers of Jesus in this upper room, quietly praying. And so one of the first things that we learn from this story is that it begins in patient fidelity, waiting fidelity, waiting faithfulness. And then all heaven breaks loose. Mighty wind rushes through the room. Tongues of fire dance on the heads of the followers. And Luke, in a very playful way, begins to turn this imagery of tongues of fire into tongues that people are speaking. And so, this first gift of the Spirit that we find in the story is the gift of proclamation. But this all is too much to be contained in this one room. The racket begins to spill out, and outside in the streets, people begin to converge and wonder what is going on. Eventually, the disciples themselves come out, and there is a divided response. People hear the gospel for the first time, and they respond. And there are others who hear, and they say, "Oh, these people, they're drunk. They're drinking new wine first thing in the morning. Let us move on from here." Another thing we learn is that when the gospel is proclaimed, not everyone responds. Some people accept. Other people do not wish to have anything to do with it. And when you look at this sort of overarching pattern of this sort of inaugural story, in the book of Acts, it matches very much the inaugural story of Jesus going to Nazareth. The same elements are there. When after he goes out into the wilderness and is tempted, he comes back, he has experienced faithful waiting through that time period. He goes into the synagogue, his home synagogue, and he is invited to pull the scroll of Isaiah, and he opens it, and what does he read? The Spirit of the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, release to the captives, sight to the blind, freedom to the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord. And what happens? Exactly the same thing that we see on the streets of Jerusalem. Some people are utterly amazed when Jesus says, this prophecy is fulfilled in your hearing. And you'll remember that other people were so enraged that they wanted to throw him off of the cliff. It's exactly the same pattern, and when we understand that Luke is the one who writes the book of Acts, and both of these stories stand at the very beginning of those two books, and they have exactly the same pattern. We have tripped across something very important that Luke wants to get across. That the church begins in faithful waiting and anticipation. That the church is inspired by the Spirit. That out of that inspiration, it proclaims the gospel, the message of salvation. And there are those who hear, and there are those who will reject. And it is this pattern that moves Jesus from the small town of Nazareth to take his message in ever wider circles to Jerusalem. And conversely, those who are his followers who begin in Jerusalem move in ever wider circles until they finally take the gospel to the center of empire in Rome. It is a powerful pattern and dynamic that we must not lose. And yet we're still dancing around something. What is the message that they give? I think it is simply this. That God is a radically embracing and liberating God that so loves us, that has so much compassion on us as human beings, that God is willing to go to extraordinary lengths to free us and to embrace us. And when you think about it, that is an incredible message. And for Luke, he's always talking about the people who are outside of the structures of polite society. And these are the people who really copy onto this message. Who follows Jesus? Who really embraces what Jesus says? People who are living in Galilee who are dispossessed from their houses because they have been foreclosed because of the economy and are living as day laborers, not knowing from day to day whether or not they will earn enough of a living wage to be able to eat and sleep in a place that night. People who are living in their own homeland as though they are in exile from it. People who have to work in the dirt so much to earn a living that they can never be clean, and because they are never clean, because they can never wash up, they're not welcome in the synagogue. This is the people this message is given to. These are the people who embrace that message because it doesn't have anything to say with, well, I've got to do this and that and everything else and obey this rule and that rule to get right with God. And who are the people who embrace the message in the book of Acts? Well, Luke practically recites every single Roman province between Judea and the capital of the empire, Rome, and saying there are Jews from these provinces who have come to Jerusalem. And these are folks who are part of the Jewish diaspora who are living in Jewish communities in major cities throughout the empire. And for many of them, they're making a darn good living as traders and as bankers. And they come to Jerusalem because it is the seat of their religion. It is like a pilgrimage for them to come to the temple. But funny thing, when they get there, the same ruling authorities that are ruling out the Galileans because they work in the dirt are saying to these Jews who are coming from around the empire, well, you live in cities filled with other people. You're not good enough to enter the temple. No wonder this message of the free, liberating God resonates with them. And who are the ones who reject? Consistently in Luke and in Acts, it is those people who already know everything there is to know about God. People who know and make the rules and enforce them with others. People who are wealthy enough to be able to follow the rules and stay and live in a clean life so that they will have ritual purity when they go into the synagogue and the temple. These are the people who reject because they understand the message. The message is the rules that you make don't matter. God is is bigger than that. God embraces and frees anyway. We are living in a time when church is declining, when there are more people outside of church who have had no experience of church than folks like us who do come to church each day. We call them affectionately the nuns. There are those people who have had experience of church and it's been a lousy experience of church and they're done with it, and we call them the duns. You know, there are a lot of people out there that resemble the times in the New Testament that are spiritual but not religious. You've heard that. You've heard people say that, and they are utterly sincere. I've talked with many of these people, and they too yearn for a deep experience in the presence of God in their lives, but they're just done with the stuff. And unfortunately, they perceive us, people who want to spread this message of a loving, embracing, liberating God, as people who are in control. How do we bridge that gap? How do we get that message of a loving, compassionate, embracing, freeing God out there without getting ourselves and our garbage and the baggage that we have in the way? And I think there are two things in this text that are worth noting. First of all, when the Spirit came upon the followers of Jesus, what happened? They began speaking in other languages. They began speaking in the languages of the people around them. And you know, we have to confess that over the centuries we have developed a language of our own in the church. As in the days of Christendom, when just about everybody was a member of a church, each denomination had its own big 5-syllable Latin word that it would sort of have as an identity. Lutherans have it in the word called justification, Methodists have it in the word called sanctification, Presbyterians have it in the word called predestination. We UCC, since we don't really have a creedal sort of formula that we make people adopt, we don't have any of those things. We talk about a thing called narthex, which is a Greek word for lobby, an ancient Greek word for lobby. Tell a newcomer, I'll meet you in the narthex. We too have our own culture and language which sometimes gets in the way of getting the message out that we know and love and embrace so deeply. One of the things that blew me away in Lent was messy church. You know, I was raised a High Church, Presbyterian Church of Scotland, raised within the context of High Church of England in an English public school. I mean, church that is sort of made of stones and high arches and medieval is my habitat. And I have to confess that messy church really pushed my buttons, really pushed the edge on me. I had a hard time trying to see it as authentic church, even as I promoted it. But what happened? People came from all over because it was done in a language they understood and embraced. And we saw it double in size over Lent and began building relationships with new people who are not normally here on Sunday morning. That is a Pentecost moment. The Spirit was definitely there. How can we continue to meet as a congregation like this, but at the same time offer those open doors to those people to express the message of a loving, embracing, passionately compassionate God who gives freedom? Second thing that I think is worth noting is looking at Peter. You know, we get this image of Peter, and it's largely we get the image of Peter as a really great sort of leader by the high passages that we read in the book of Acts, and by the few passages in the Gospels where Jesus singles him out and says, Peter, you're going to have to be the head of the church. I'll give you the keys to the kingdom. But look at the narrative of Luke and at the beginning of Acts over the previous weeks from Easter to this point. And Peter doesn't play a very heroic figure at all. In fact, I think we truly see the real character of Peter coming out When Jesus is arrested, he sort of skulks along in the shadows, and when a serving girl, a mere serving girl, calls him out as a Galilean, oh, no, I don't know the man. He's not even there at the crucifixion. He's one of the last people to affirm the good news of the resurrection. He drags his feet. Even in the first chapter of Acts, when we see this scene where Peter is presiding over the election of a new disciple, apostle, to take the place of Judas, his speech is almost ashamedly apologetic. It's entirely disingenuous, talking about how Judas was such a traitor, completely overlooking what he had done. And yet here today, by the power of the Spirit, Peter is transformed, and he begins to proclaim the same gospel that Jesus proclaimed in Nazareth and throughout the rest of his ministry. And Peter then goes on, and as the church is shattered and scattered by the ruling religious elite in Jerusalem and has to get out of the city, Peter is one of the first to begin to go to other communities. He is the first one who goes to a Roman garrison in Caesarea and baptizes Roman soldiers and comes back to the church in Jerusalem, and he's practically deposed for it. That transformation of the Spirit enables him to move from this cowardly person who sort of stands back in the shadows and pushes other people forward and pushes other people under the bus to take the blame, to be the person who will take the risk. That's what the power of the Spirit can do for us. And so I think that the pattern of this story and the implications of how it sort of unfolds, and it begins with patient waiting and faithfulness, fidelity, the openness to the coming of the Spirit, the welling up of the urgency to proclaim a message about a God who is passionately compassionate, embracing, wanting to free us from those things that bind us. And then working with those who accept, incorporating them into a community in new ways that enable us as the church to move in places that we have never gone before. And I wonder, what would it be like if we were conscious of this pattern as we this summer begin to wind down our program here and go into that time of patient waiting with faithfulness, being open to what the Spirit is moving around us, and then moving into a fall with new things and new ideas and new ways to proclaim the gospel that we know so well. And then figuring out how we can embrace and bring these new folks within our fellowship to take our church on a journey to where it has never gone before, to take the next step for us to be that church of Pentecost, because the story isn't just a story that happened a long time ago, as origin stories always are. They are our story about who we are and what we do. May God bless this summer as we plan, dream, and have visions. May God bless us as we work to bring those visions into reality. May next year be a year where we as a congregation take bold new steps in the power of the Spirit.